Let's dive into one of the most famous and, let's be honest, most misunderstood books ever written. We're not just going to review the book of Revelation, we're going to try and unlock its prophetic climax. And what it reveals, well, it might just be the exact opposite of everything you've ever been told. When you hear Book of Revelation, what pops into your head? For most of us, it's this epic, kind of scary movie montage, right? Plagues, monstrous beasts, cosmic wars, and, of course, the final fiery judgment of the world. It's a powerful vision, and frankly, it can be pretty terrifying.
But here's the question that's at the very heart of this explainer. What if we've all been focusing on the wrong thing? What if the main point of this incredibly complex book isn't about God's vengeance in destroying the nations, but about converting them? I know, it sounds pretty wild, but it's an idea that changes everything.
To even begin to unlock this interpretation, we have to start with one single crucial clue that, according to the argument we're looking at, has been missed by almost everyone. Think of it like a master key to the entire book, the scroll. Okay, so here's the puzzle that has shaped how people have read this book for centuries. In Revelation, we actually see two different scrolls. In chapter 5, there's this big, sealed scroll, a biblion, held by God in heaven. But then in chapter 10, an angel has a small, open scroll, a biblioridion. Because the Greek words are different, the locations are different, and one's sealed while the other's open, scholars have pretty much always just assumed they're two separate things. But here's the radical claim. What if that assumption is a huge mistake? The argument is that these are not two different scrolls, but one and the same scroll at different points in the story. Realizing this, it's argued, is the key that unlocks the book's true message. It's a bold claim for sure, so let's look at the evidence. So how can we possibly argue these two are the same? Well, the case rests on 4 key points. First off, linguistics. Turns out the Greek words biblion and biblioridion were often used interchangeably in other texts from that same time period. Second, they share a source text. Both of these visions are directly modeled on the same story from the prophet Ezekiel. John is basically reenacting a single classic prophetic scene. Third, you have literary echoes. Chapter 5 talks about a mighty angel, and then chapter 10 has another mighty angel. It's a deliberate wink, linking the two scenes together. And finally, the prophetic connection. This is presented as the unsealing of the very same scroll that the prophet Daniel was told to seal up until the time of the end. Okay, so if the scrolls are the same, what's the message inside this now open scroll? Well, the moment the prophet John eats it, internalizes its message, we get the answer. The core message is revealed in a miniature story, a parable about the 2 witnesses in chapter 11.
This little parable tells a completely different kind of story. The arc is just stunning. First, you have these 2 witnesses who symbolize the church, and they're delivering their prophecy. Then, in what looks like a total and complete failure, they're killed by the beast. But this is the pivot point. They are vindicated when they're resurrected right in front of their enemies. And here's the climax, the absolute shocker. This incredible event doesn't lead to their enemies getting zapped by lightning. It leads to their conversion. The survivors, the text says, gave glory to the God of heaven.
To really get how radical this is, we have to remember the typical pattern of victory in the Old Testament. A perfect example is the book of Esther. God's people are in danger, but they're delivered when they turn the tables and completely destroy their enemies. Victory means the slaughter of those who wanted to kill you. Revelation just flips that script on its head, completely. Here, victory isn't achieved by killing your enemies. It's the exact opposite. It's the willing death, the martyrdom of God's people. That very act of faithful witness is what leads to the conversion of their enemies. This totally redefines what victory even looks like. And this reversal goes even deeper, right down to the nitty-gritty theology. See, in the Old Testament, when a judgment is coming, the remnant is usually the small, faithful group that gets spared, while the unfaithful majority is judged. But look at what happens in Revelation 11. The math is inverted. A small part, a tenth, perishes, but the remnant, the ones who are spared, is the vast majority. And this majority, spared because of the witness of the martyrs, is the group that repents. The whole focus shifts from saving a few faithful people to converting the many who were not. And this theme of conversion, it isn't just a one-off idea either. The book comes back and reinforces it with another really powerful set of agricultural symbols in chapter 14, giving us another crucial look at the end times. Now, to understand this next bit, we need to quickly get a key term down: first fruits.
In ancient farming and theology, the first fruits were the first small part of the harvest that you'd offer to God. This wasn't just a random sacrifice, it was a promise. It was a guarantee that the full, complete harvest was on its way. Okay, so here's the connection. Get this. In Revelation 14, the martyred church, those faithful witnesses who died, are explicitly called the first fruits offered to God. This is such a critical detail. It means their death isn't the end of the story. They are the pledge of a much, much bigger spiritual harvest that is still to come. So right after this first fruits offering, chapter 14 describes two totally separate end-time harvests. And it's so important to tell them apart. The grain harvest is the positive one. It's the salvation, the gathering of nations that was promised by the martyrs. The grape harvest, on the other hand, is judgment. It's the treading of the winepress of God's wrath for those who refuse to repent. So why are we so sure the grain harvest is positive, that it's about salvation? Well, there are three big clues in the text. First, like we just saw, it's the logical fulfillment of the martyrs being the first fruits. Second, the imagery is super specific. The only action mentioned is reaping, which means gathering. All the typical judgment stuff like threshing the grain or burning the chaff, totally absent. And third, and this is a big one, look at who the reaper is. He's described as one like a son of man from Daniel 7. And in Daniel's prophecy, that's a figure who receives a kingdom from God, not one who goes around executing wrath. He's a king gathering his people. Okay, so let's step back for a second. When you put all of these pieces together, the idea of the single scroll, the parable of the witnesses, and the two different harvests, it forces us to completely reframe the entire message of Revelation. It gives us a new and, I think, profound vision of what victory really means. What this interpretation does is it transforms Revelation from being some kind of deterministic timetable of divine vengeance into something much more dynamic. Really, a manual for redemptive witness. The focus shifts from just predicting destruction to actually showing the church how its faithful suffering can play a part in saving the world. So, to boil it all down, Revelation's surprising message really comes down to three key takeaways. First, God's ultimate goal is the conversion of the nations, not blowing them up. Second, the engine that drives this conversion is the suffering, faithful witness of the church. And third, victory gets a radical redefinition. It's not about overpowering your enemies, but about winning them over through sacrifice. And there you have it, a complete rereading of this prophetic climax. It's a whole journey that takes us from a single, sealed-up scroll all the way to the promise of a universal harvest. So, we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If this interpretation holds up, it presents a radical challenge to how we normally think. How does viewing martyrdom not as the ultimate defeat, but as the actual mechanism of divine victory? How does that completely change our modern understanding of power, of influence, and of what it truly means to change the world?